It seemed like money laundering to me, but do you remember when ALAIN Reyes brought forth the scandal about the amount of money that was being spent on the Governor General's dry cleaning? We tried to break that story. Nobody touched it. CTV, CBC, Global, nobody touched it. We tried to break that story. So at first, this happened. Just watching it live, right here. This is all that happened. We were watching it live and caught us by surprise. Here it is. Wound up. Today he seems to be
Mr. Speaker,
pretty easy
after
going.
the Governor General's lavish
an
spending
independent.
on international travel, we've learned her office spent over $117,000 on dry cleaning since 2018, an average of $1,800 per month.
Did you hear what he just
I
said?
did some calculations based on the going rate for these services.
$1,800 a month
she's been spending
since 2018
that's
on
an average
dry cleaning.
Of 3 outfits a day, 365
That's gonna
days
be an
a
issue.
year. Why doesn't the government cut her $33 million budget? What are they waiting for? Because she's clearly incapable of managing taxpayers' money seriously and responsibly.
That's embarrassing. That's going to be a thing. That's interesting. Good. Yeah, we're getting late on time.
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Governor General
What is she going to
has
say to
done
that?
important work for Canada.
$33 million worth
Obviously,
of important
we
work?
expect every dollar she spends to be done in a rigorous and conscientious way. Thank you.
That was quick.
Well, this brings to the end of question period.
What?
I understand there's going to be a number of...
But then that story just went away. Nobody followed it up. Whatever. It's weird that nobody would follow up a scandal like that. We put out this piece trying to draw some attention. And we also criticized ALAIN Reyes for not following up his own story. But we've got more on that to come after this.
Mr. Speaker, every time
This
we
is
ask
ALAIN
questions
Reyes.
about
He
the
dropped
Governor
a scandal
General's
bomb 2
indecent
weeks ago. It was
spending,
wild.
the government gets a little offended. They pay lip service, but nothing is done to change the culture of this institution. The Governor General spends thousands on meals, alcoholic beverages, luxury hotels, trips, cleaning services, just to name a few. Imagine on a single plane trip, she even spent nearly $1,000 on slices of lime and lemon. You couldn't make this up. So I repeat my question to the government. Does the government intend to cut its $33 million budget because clearly it doesn't seem to be able to manage taxpayers' money seriously and responsibly?
It's pretty great.
The Honourable Minister.
That's an interesting story.
The Governor General does important work for Canada here and throughout the world. And of course, we expect all public office holders to spend every dollar with respect, with rigour, and in a conscientious way, respecting all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Last time he shut down the House with his
Unfortunately,
it happened again.
And brings us to the end of our question period.
This is so wild, guys. That's 2 times in a row
that we have
ALAIN Reyes dropped the bomb.
The member for Regina Capel has the floor.
And they shut it down right afterwards. It's just really funny. I'm going to have to do some investigating. We've got some more things to do.
On this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we honor survivors and the children who never returned home. We reflect on the devastating legacy of the residential school system. And we, as a government and as a people, we match remembrance with responsibility.
Canadians gathered today for the 5th Annual National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This year also marks the 10-year anniversary of the final report from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Governor General Mary Simon attended events commemorating the day in Ottawa. I spoke with the Governor General last week at Rideau Hall about Canada's reconciliation efforts.
Governor General Mary Simon, thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
This year's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation comes just ahead of the 10th anniversary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report. What are your thoughts as we reach that decade milestone on this?
Well, when I reflect back on the last 10 years, a lot of changes have taken place. And one of those big changes was the report that started this reconciliation process that I'm involved in every day in my role. And and looking across the country and traveling to all the provinces and the territories, you know, there is a lot of progress. There's still a lot to do, but there has been tremendous change taking place in this country.
What's the most visible example of that change from your perspective that you've seen?
The most visible is the dialogue that is happening between First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples with other Canadians. This is something that didn't happen years ago. In fact, we were very much separated from the mainstream Canada, but particularly in the last, I would say, 25 years, significant change has taken place. There's still lots of challenges to deal with, and you know, that is part of life in itself. But at the same time, there is still a lot to do. And we have to uplift our communities. We can't leave them behind. So the discussion that I have across the country is, you know, things that we take for granted in other parts of the country, in other parts they're not available. And this is something that I think we need to address as a country.
The awareness and the conversation definitely has escalated to a top-level issue.
Yes.
I mean, before it was very much on the back burner. But the community aspect you just mentioned, like there has been progress made on boil water orders, but there's still deficiencies there and on infrastructure. Is that where you think the most progress is still left to be made?
Pretty much, yes. When you look at the more remote regions of the country and the more remote the communities are and the smaller the communities are, that's where a lot of the services are pretty much non-existent.
Right.
And I think that in this day and age, living in a country like ours, which is considered quite a wealthy country, I think there should be more equality in terms of how we provide services to our people across the country, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous. And that's an area that requires a lot of work.
We're on the cusp of what appears to be an ambitious economic development agenda, industrial development agenda in Canada. And there is the potential in that for opportunity for a lot of Indigenous communities, but also potentially some collision, right? Because we've seen some of the concerns raised about where the resource extraction agenda and the industrial policy may go, but then people like Wab Kinew, the Premier of Manitoba, says if we do this right as a country, it has a chance to change the lives for some of the poorest children in all of Canada. When you look at this moment, you talk about the progress that has been made, there is the potential for some friction in the next couple of years on this, but also to realize this promise, right? How do you see this moment?
Well, it's hard to predict the future in that respect, but when I look at the commitment that has been made now from the Prime Minister to work with Indigenous people and make them partners, as well as provide employment, I think that there's an opportunity here that if taken at the level that they're talking, should be able to resolve some of these potential conflicting issues. I'm a firm believer that if you can bring and be inclusive and have an open discussion and work things out, that those conflicts aren't there. I hear the commitments loud and clear, even though there's been some, unhappiness about how much consultation or lack of consultation was undertaken for C9. As soon as that bill was put through, the Prime Minister recommitted that process. And that's where I think they can work out these issues that might or might not be problems at all.
Yeah, given the history, there's an understandable skepticism in a lot of communities, and there's going to be a question of trust, and this is what reconciliation is heavily about, right? Is the ability to trust each other and work together.
Yes, the trust has to be built. The trust was broken, and that's one of the things that I do in my work on reconciliation, is to rebuild that trust. And, you know, we think about reconciliation a lot, and a lot is happening, but, you know, I was in a conversation recently, and one thing I realize now is that sometimes we look at reconciliation probably not in the context that it should be spoken about. It's more of a value that we should carry with us. It's a lifelong commitment. And reconciliation is like empathy, happiness, you know, like it's one of those values that transcend policy development. And some people look at it as a policy issue. It's not a policy issue. It's a value that we should be able to talk about every day and figure out where the problems are, like problems related to our education system, problems related to curriculum development so that Indigenous people can teach their children in their language. Those are all issues that will affect how we get along and how much this country will become richer in terms of its people. How well we will get along means that we have to make some significant changes.
I've seen the change in what my kids learn in school, what they're taught in school, versus what I learned in school, what I was taught in school. So it seems to have penetrated into that area, but as it's becoming sort of a value that is like a part of the fabric of the country, do you sense that in the 10 years since the report came out and the recommendations were made that it is starting to weave in to the values of the country?
Yes, I see it. I do see it, and it's getting stronger. Although, you know, when people are living through difficult periods in their lives, they don't think about it too much. But when you talk to them about it, then people open up and start discussing how we can do better. And this is something that I have seen throughout the country, not just amongst Indigenous people, but non-Indigenous people too. But at the same time, there's still a lot that we have to carry.
You know, you mentioned opening up. You opened up when you testified as an honorary witness at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I was struck in Whit Fraser's book, reading about that day for you and that moment for you, because we've heard the story of residential schools of children who were taken away and sent to the school. And that's not what happened, that's not your experience, right? Because your father was white, you were considered not Inuk enough, so you got left behind in a community where so many of the older children were gone, were taken. And you talked about you're left in a community. I saw the despair of fathers with no sons to hunt with, mothers with no daughters to sew with, and grandmothers with no children to tell stories to. That you began feeling bad, even guilty, that you were spared this experience. I've not heard that perspective in the conversation about residential schools. Why was it important for you to tell that story?
It was a significant event for me on a personal level, because I was carrying that guilt and didn't really understand it until I started to think about all the kids that, you know, went to residential school and were traumatized, abused, and then I felt that I probably got the better end of the deal because my father was our teacher. He taught us, we went through high school with my father most of the time, but the reason we weren't eligible is the policy, the Indian Act,
right.
Which was not supposed to apply to Inuit because we don't live on reserves. When my father went to register us for school, we were denied education because my parents were married. And it wasn't so much anybody in our community that ever thought we weren't Inuit. It was the government that had the Indian Act that allowed them to make these discriminatory decisions on individuals and families. And that's what happened to me and my brother. And the rest of our siblings didn't have the same status.
But the guilt you talked about there, you're starting to feel guilty, and Sundays were particularly difficult because after church it was time to visit families. And that absence of peers was striking.
Yeah, so my grandmother always wanted to go to church, so she made us go to church. And she would visit her friends after church, have tea and bannock, and we would be there with her. And the parents often hugged us, and I couldn't quite figure that one out when I was growing up. Why would they hug us? But then I realized at some point that this is because they were missing their children so much that they wanted to feel the body of a child, you know, and it's heavy. It's pretty heavy stuff.
I mean, can I ask how you dealt with that over time? Like you mentioned, it's almost like a survivor guilt. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but being spared what happened at residential schools to so many other children, but this is a lonely way to be, 12, 13 years old, right?
Well, I dealt with it probably like other people deal with these things. You end up in a crisis and you have to get some support and help. That's what happened to me when I was a young adult. I worked so hard that I burnt myself out, and then I had to deal with the burnout, and the whole thing came out at that point that this was something that had affected my life to the point where I just had to work 24/7.
Well, years later, here you are as Governor General. You've 4 years. You've been in this job. Typically, it's a 5-year term unless it gets extended, and I don't know if you know what's happening there. I certainly don't know what's happening there. You've put a heavy focus on the issue of reconciliation in your time in this role. What's the plan for the year you have left for sure in this job? Is it to continue on this? Other priorities? What do you think you will focus on?
What I want to do is be out talking to Canadians up until the day I leave, because that's my role. I'm not apolitical, but I have a role to play, and not just in the constitutional sense. I'm responsible in terms of the constitutional issue in Canada, and I take that very seriously. But there's a lot of other things that I connect with Canadians on. Mental health has been a big part of my work over the last 4 years. We're going to put together something after all the trips that I took from east to west, north and so on, and tell Canada what I heard from Canadians on mental health. There's a story there, and it's going to come from Canadians. It's not going to be my voice. It'll be the voice of Canadians.
Do you think that's an issue that's gotten worse in the last number of years, sort of post-COVID, post-pandemic? It feels like that was an accelerant for many difficult things.
It got worse during COVID. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of talk about that. But even after COVID lifted what do you call them? The masks, restrictions. Yeah, when the restrictions ended, a lot of people didn't get help that they needed. So usually when somebody is going through a deep depression or is requiring support, and all the people, Indigenous people that went to residential school that were already carrying that trauma, it just has stayed there. And the services haven't been the same. As we all know, we have family that are waiting to see somebody, and they don't come to the north, really.
Right. So just as a final point, by putting this focus on mental health as a challenge, in the final months of your tenure as Governor General, what do you hope is the outcome of that? What do you hope the policymakers and the political actors take from that and then put into effect?
Well, we have all these reports that have been published, including the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, calls to action, There's the unmarked graves of children that went to that were in residential school. I think that the work that is happening now, like looking at those at different levels, governmental level, people-to-people level, education, I'm hoping that that trend is going to keep going, that when I leave, that trend won't suddenly die out, that it will continue and grow, because that's what is going to one day say, we're going to say to ourselves, we've come a long way, you know, but we're not there yet.
Your Excellency, Governor General Mary Simon, thank you so much for your time.